Communism was at least the most oppressive regime that we have ever lived through. We have had first-hand experience, and we are here to tell the story.
After 46 years of living in one of the toughest, most isolationist communist regimes of all time, the students of Albania decided in 1990 that they wanted a new, democratic government put in place that gave them the basic human rights and freedoms that they were denied for their entire lives. The conflict of student protests, uprisings, and the government's inability to control their citizens was resolved when the government compromised with the people and allowed for the creation of political parties, removed all former communists from power, and allowed free and fair elections that resulted in a democratic parliamentary republic system that still stands today. This event proves that even drastic change is possible without use of excessive violence, because in just the span of 4 days, the students of Albania managed to persuade their terrorizing government to grant them political pluralism peacefully, ultimately illustrating that transformity in severely oppressive governments in present day, such as North Korea, can be overcome through the perseverance of the people.
The Albanian Communist Party was founded on the 8th of November in 1941 and rose to power over Albania in 1944. Enver Hoxha was the head of the Albanian government and turned Albania into one of the strictest, most terrorizing communist regimes that the world has ever seen.
You can literally say that they removed the capacity of the individual to be the individual and think for themselves or do for themselves.
Under his rule, Albania has often been described as the North Korea of Europe, and for good reason. In both cases, their citizens were not allowed to leave the country or have any contact with foreigners, have a choice of career, a choice of where to live, the right of political pluralism, or a fair vote, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right to own private property, or the right to conduct private business.
It's pretty much you do as told. There are consequences.
Speaking negatively of the dictator or disobeying the government in both countries led to being executed or sent to a forced labor prison camp. Additionally, the extended family of someone who broke the law would also be punished for generations. The law went so far as to punish people for wearing blue jeans or cutting your hair in a hairstyle not regulated by the government.
The way people dress, the way people maintain themselves, even the haircut, as a best example.
The right to speak, the right to express your opinion, the right to say what you thought. I mean, all the fundamental freedoms that the people have in this country that were pretty much non-existent.
Working 6 days a week and living in conditions of dire poverty were the norm in communist Albania and in present-day North Korea. Enver Hoxha is responsible for killing over 100,000 of his own people through this system, and the North Korean regime has killed an estimated over 200,000 of their own people.
On April 11th of 1985, Enver Hoxha died.
Yeah, I remember in 1985 when I was a student your age. A lot of students started crying, and because the leader passed away. Everybody was lining up to pay tribute, pay homage to the leader, and that was the brainwash that everybody went through. When you see people crying and lining up again, for days, trying to coming from all over the country. That's how sick, that's how brainwashed people were.
His immediate successor took over as the new supreme leader of Albania. In his short 5-year rule, Ramiz Alia struggled with attempting to preserve the communist government system while also trying to instill reforms to improve the drastically declining economy. The government was weaker than ever before and was running out of money to ration out to their already poor citizens. The people were left without basic resources, and mothers had to line up for hours to feed their children. Noticing the deteriorating system, people began to take advantage of the crumbling government to initiate democratic change.
Spurred by the news of the fall of the Berlin Wall on November 9, 1989, and the toppling of the other communist regimes in Europe, Albanian citizens camped out on the lawns of foreign embassies for a month until the government compromised and allowed some to travel to foreign countries and leave Albania for the first time in 5 decades.
What I think is that if the Berlin Wall did not happen and the movements in the Eastern Bloc did not happen, I think Albania still to this day would have been a communist country.
The spark for the movement to replace the communist regime in Albania began when the students spoke up about the condition of the universities in Student City. They had broken windows, no heat, sporadic water, and electricity cuts. Their economic concerns quickly took a political turn in November of 1990, when students wrote letters to Ramiz Alia and the government asking for political reform. In an interview conducted by Fred Abrahams in 2002, Alia said, "They told me they had economic concerns, but it was clear that it was a political rather than economic problem." That same year, beginning on December 8th, just a mere 100 students gathered to protest in the streets of Tirana. And by December 12th, over 80,000 people joined in. They were chanting, "Freedom! We want democracy." Azem Haidari emerged as the leader of the student revolution and eventually the head of Albania's first opposition party. On December 11th, marking the fourth day of the student revolt, the student leaders came up with a list of 9 demands for Ramiz Aliyah, including an increase in reforms, political pluralism, punishment for the police who had beaten protesters, and a meeting with Aliyah. Aliyah agreed to meet with the students on December 12th at the Presidential Palace of the Brigades.
The students elected 30 delegates to represent them in the first free election since 1951. This delegation would later become known as the Democratic Party. Later that day, 98% of the Central Committee of the government voted yes to allow the creation of independent political organizations. They followed the delegation to meeting with Aliyah, where he announced that he would be given the right to political pluralism. On February 20th of 1991, the people gathered to topple down the giant statue of Enver Hoxha that was located in the capital city of Tirana. The first contested election in Albania since 1923 occurred in March of 1991. However, a strike in opposition of the people occurred after the first election that the Communist Labour Party in power. In order for the government to come to a full compromise with the democratic protesters, a new stability government was formed that included non-communist politicians. In the March of 1992 election, the Democratic Party won most of the seats in parliament, and Sali Berisha became the president. The development of a democratic parliament and the forced removal of all former communists from positions of leadership led to Albania becoming the unitary parliamentary republic that it is today, where the President of Albania is the head of state and the Prime Minister of Albania is the head of government in a multi-party system. In 2009, Albania became a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and in 2014, Albania was granted candidate status for accession into the European Union.
Albania stands as a precedent and proves that a peaceful and nonviolent change from the current tremendously oppressive government system led by Kim Jong-un in North Korea into a democratic state is possible, as outrageous as it may sound. Not only are the living conditions and government system in present-day North Korea almost identical to that of Albania under the rule of Enver Hoxha, but in both cases the government controls the people by isolating them from the outside world, thus brainwashing them into believing that the conditions of dire poverty in which their citizens live in are the best of any other place.
If nothing, internationally happens, North Korea would, it has very little incentive for things to happen internally, for it to actually do something.
In fact, the people of Albania wholeheartedly supported their government and their tyrannical dictator Enver Hoxha, even crying at his funeral, even though he made their lives a living hell. Similarly to how the citizens of North Korea today praise their leader, who has also killed over 200,000 of his own people. The change in how the people of Albania viewed their government happened when they got in contact with foreigners, heard news of the toppling of other communist regimes throughout Eastern Europe in the late 80s, and were impacted by the economic decline of their government. The people began to notice that people from other countries lived better lives than they did, and due to the government no longer being able to provide their people with basic human needs, they became unhappy with the government, and what started as an economic problem turned into a revolution for democracy. If China were to announce that they now allowed multiple political parties to form, and if North and South Korea were to gain a friendlier relationship, this would have the same impact on North Korea as the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Iron Curtain did on Albania, by not only setting an example for change, but by allowing North Koreans to interact with South Koreans, where they would quickly realize that South Koreans lived more fulfilling lives than they did. We must remember that the political system in Albania did not change directly after Enver Hoxha died, proving that the people must bind together to take down the entire system and not just the leader. Ultimately, this reveals that momentum is needed for peace to prevail over violence. Finally, since the revolution for democracy in Albania started as an economic problem, the United States embargo and trade restrictions against North Korea proves to be beneficial because by indirectly harming the North Korean economy, the North Korean citizens' quality in life will decrease in the short term, causing them to feel unsatisfied by the rule of their government. However, ultimately, this will have a positive effect on their lives in the long term, because if the people are unhappy, they will begin to rise up against the government, which could very well lead to a removal of their oppressive government and the installation of a democracy.
Imagine all the